A moment of silence, sharp and sudden, swallowed the entire 50th floor lobby of Viridian Industries' Seattle headquarters. The air conditioning unit hummed, the only consistent sound against the nervous tension that gripped the mingling corporate crowd. They had just witnessed a deliberate public act of cruelty so audacious it seemed staged. Evelyn Thorne stood immobile, every fiber of her being refusing to react, refusing to grant her tormentors the satisfaction of a visible breakdown. An entire cup of ice-cold sticky cola had been flung directly into her face by a polished young man, an entitled intern named Blake. The sweet, sickening liquid now streamed down her neck, soaking the collar of her thin white blouse and dampening the neat, dark bun into which she had pulled her hair. The insult hung heavy. "Oops, thought you were janitorial," he had sneered, the words delivered with the casual brutality of a silver spoon scratching porcelain. Laughter, loud and uncontrolled, exploded around her, a cruel, immediate chorus. Evelyn's temporary trainee badge, pinned haphazardly to her chest, swayed faintly as she held her breath. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, a steady hazel, methodically scanned the faces in the crowd, the initial bursts of mockery dying down unevenly, sputtering out like a stalled engine under the pressure of her unwavering gaze. Her flat shoes squeaked faintly, the sound magnified in the sudden, uncomfortable quiet as a few employees shuffled their feet. Blake, the perpetrator, a picture of slicked-back hair and expensive, tailored confidence, twirled his now empty plastic cup. Evelyn looked at him, and though she said nothing, the slight, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw made the already heavy air seem to compress further. Blake, oblivious to the seismic shift he had just initiated, offered a quick smirk and walked off toward the networking mixers buffet, followed by the rest of the crowd, whose whispers trailed behind them like smoke. Evelyn was left alone for a drawn moment, the lobby's expansive glass walls reflecting her silhouette against the towering Seattle skyline. Her blouse, now tacky and wrinkled, clung uncomfortably to her skin, and her gray slacks, pulled from the back of a closet, looked slightly too loose. No one in that room could have possibly guessed the truth, that she was a Thorne, born into one of the country's wealthiest families, raised by private tutors, and schooled in a world where power was innate and never had to be announced. Her family's name wasn't merely wealth, it was old power, the kind that demanded silence and deference. But here, in the cutthroat environment of Viridian, she was a non-entity, a fact she had meticulously ensured. The European parent company had sent Evelyn to Viridian Industries' North American division to disappear. She was here to observe, to listen, and to truly understand the company's culture and people before she formally stepped into her designated role as chairwoman and inevitably, as the global consensus demanded, turned the entire structure upside down. As Evelyn finally moved toward the elevator, a group of junior account managers, their movements radiating studied importance, blocked her path. Their designer watches glinted under the harsh, white fluorescent lights. One woman, Sienna, tall, with a platinum blonde bob that looked sharp enough to wound, leaned in, her sneer perfected by years of practice. "Excuse me." Sienna's voice was loud and deliberately carrying, designed to attract attention. "This elevator is for staff, not temps. There's a service lift in the back. Smells like garbage, but you'll fit right in." The others laughed, their eyes raking over Evelyn's damp, plain clothes. Evelyn's hand, which had been hovering over the elevator call button, dropped. She turned to face Sienna. Her expression remained utterly unchanged, yet a quiet, burning intensity in her eyes made the blonde woman's practiced smirk momentarily falter. "I'll take the stairs," Evelyn stated, her voice perfectly even. She then walked away, her steps echoing distinctly in the abrupt silence that followed. Sienna, recovering quickly, exchanged uneasy glances with her colleagues before tossing her hair and hitting the elevator button, muttering dismissively, "Whatever. She's nobody." The lobby quickly returned to its buzz, people congregating around the open bar and expensive appetizers. Evelyn stayed on the periphery, watching. She noted the way people naturally orbited the powerful, the executives, the ones with the promised corner offices. Blake was still holding court, tossing out loud one-liners, his arrogance buoyed by the crowd's deference. Sienna hovered nearby, her laugh too loud, constantly flipping her sleek hair. Evelyn's gaze shifted, catching a flicker of movement near a granite pillar. A woman in her late 60s, with a sharp grey bob and a formidable no-nonsense stare, stood observing the room like a predatory hawk. This was Eleanor, a senior advisor who had dedicated decades to Viridian. Eleanor wasn't mingling, she was watching. When her gaze finally landed on Evelyn, something shifted. Not pity, not judgment, but a flash of recognition. Eleanor saw what no one else did. Eleanor approached Evelyn, her heels clicking precisely on the polished floor. Without preamble or conversation, she handed Evelyn a thick, heavy folder, the kind sealed with a prominent red, confidential stamp. "Direct message from the chairman," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. "You are to review the restructuring blueprint before tonight's closed meeting." The folder was dense, stuffed with papers that carried the weight of careers, papers that could and would make or break them. A nearby employee, a nervous man in an overly tight tie, overheard the phrase and froze. "Wait, what? Chair who?" he stammered, his eyes wide. Evelyn accepted the folder, her fingers steady and sure, and gave Eleanor a small silent nod. No questions, no need for explanation, just a quiet "thank you." The employee's jaw dropped, but Evelyn had already turned and walked away, the weighty folder tucked securely under her arm. Later, during a short coffee break, Evelyn paused in the break room, reaching for a paper towel to dab at the cola that still left her blouse sticky. A cluster of marketing associates instantly surrounded her. One man, with aggressively gelled hair and a loud tie, leaned against the counter, deliberately blocking her access. "You know, we actually have a dress code here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension and mockery. "That outfit is giving thrift store clearance rack." His friend snickered. Another associate, tapping her manicured nails on her phone screen, snapped a photo of Evelyn, the bright flash momentarily catching the tired depths of her eyes. "Post that with #officefail," the woman chirped. Evelyn's hand paused on the paper towel rack, her shoulders stiffening, just enough to be noticeable. She turned slowly, her gaze locking onto the guy's face. "Is that all you've got?" she asked. Her voice was soft, dangerously quiet, yet impossibly sharp, the sound of a blade sliding cleanly out of its sheath. The break room went utterly silent. The guy's practiced smirk faltered as he struggled to find a comeback that matched her sudden, unexpected intensity. But Evelyn gave him no time. She walked out, leaving the crumpled, unused paper towel lying on the counter. She proceeded toward the designated conference room, the weight of the confidential folder a grounding presence. The hallway was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound, the faint thud of her flats on the industrial carpet, the low hum of the air conditioning. She passed a glass-walled office where two employees were whispering and giggling, their eyes darting toward her. "Is that the Coke girl?" A woman with a sleek ponytail and an expensive scarf pointed openly, laughing. "What's she carrying? Did she steal someone's homework?" Her friend cackled in response. But Evelyn did not break stride. Her pace remained even, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't need to respond, not yet. The folder held in her hands was sufficient proof of her authority, regardless of their ignorance. As she reached the stairwell landing, a group of interns was gathered, their voices loud and careless. One, a wiry kid with a smug, fresh-faced grin and a vape pen dangling from his fingers, spotted her. "Hey, you dropped something," he called out, tossing a crumpled napkin directly at her feet. The group burst into laughter as the napkin fluttered to the ground. "Pick it up, janitor lady," another jeered, her voice mocking. Evelyn stopped. Her eyes dropped to the crumpled napkin, then lifted slowly to meet the intern's collective gaze. She bent down slowly and deliberately, picked up the refuse, and tucked it into her pocket. "Thanks for the heads up," she said, her tone so calm and flat it registered with the weight of a physical blow. The wiry kid's laugh instantly caught in his throat, and the entire group fell silent as Evelyn continued her ascent up the stairs, her steps steady, her bag swinging lightly at her side. Down the hall, a facilities manager who had witnessed the entire exchange quietly noted the interns' names on his clipboard, his jaw tight with disapproval. She finally reached the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and she stepped inside. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft overhead lighting. The room was empty, yet the atmosphere felt electrically charged, like the prelude to a thunderstorm. She placed the confidential folder on the table, her fingers resting on the cover for a long moment. She stood still, tracing the outline of the Seattle skyline visible through the expansive window. She wasn't thinking about the sticky soda still drying on her skin, nor the echoes of the cruel laughter that persisted in her mind. She was focused entirely on Viridian Industries. Its financials, its organizational charts, its people, and the systemic rot that had allowed this culture to flourish. She had been dispatched here to fix it, to methodically cut out the dead weight, and she was now seeing precisely where to begin. Sienna's sharp voice sliced through the silence. "Hey, this room is for management only," she announced, standing dramatically in the doorway. Sienna's red dress seemed impossibly bright under the fluorescent lights, as if she were trying to visually dominate the room. "The training room is down by the copier. You know where the trainees belong." Sienna's tone was sharp, but Evelyn detected a thin edge of nervousness, as if Sienna couldn't quite fathom why this insignificant temp was standing in the management suite. Evelyn turned, her eyes locking onto Sienna's. For a long second, neither woman moved. "I must have misread the schedule," Evelyn finally said, her voice calm, almost gentle. However, the intensity with which she held Sienna's gaze made the air feel suddenly thin and tight. Sienna forced a shaky smirk. "Yeah, well, don't let it happen again," she snapped, turning abruptly on her heel. Evelyn watched her go, then calmly picked up the confidential folder and left the room, her steps as steady as before. As Evelyn walked past the HR department, a memo pinned to the bulletin board momentarily caught her eye. It was a list of new hires. Her name was hastily scribbled at the bottom, almost an afterthought. Evelyn Thorne, trainee. A junior HR representative, a wiry guy with a persistent smug grin, noticed her lingering and stepped forward. "Oh, you're the trainee, right?" he announced, loud enough for the nearby cubicles to hear. "That list is for actual employees. Don't worry, we'll get you a proper badge. Maybe next month." Laughter rippled through the office, heads popping up over the cubicle walls like vultures scanning prey. Evelyn's fingers lightly brushed the edge of the memo, her eyes scanning her own handwritten name. She ignored the representative. Instead, she reached out, calmly tore the memo down, folded it into a meticulous square, and slipped it into her bag. "I'll keep this," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying a profound, unexpected weight that caused the HR rep's grin to instantly falter. As she walked away, a senior HR manager, who had been observing the entire interaction from her office, picked up her phone, her expression grim, and dialed the board. In the hallway, Evelyn's personal phone buzzed. A discreet, vibration-only notification. She glanced at the screen, her thumb swiping to answer a call from Global Legal. The voice on the other end was formal and crisp. "Thorne, all share transfers are finalized. You are now the legal chairwoman of our North American branch. Tonight is your formal announcement." Evelyn paused, her eyes lifting to a framed black and white photograph on the wall, an image of Viridian's first humble office decades ago. Her grandfather had been in that photo, shaking hands with the original founder. She had seen it 1,000 times, growing up, listening to the stories of how the Thornes built their family's enduring legacy. "I'll wait and see who deserves to stay after this restructure," she stated into the phone, her voice low but undeniably firm. The lawyer on the other end didn't argue. He knew better than to question a Thorne. During a team huddle in the open plan office, a senior strategist, a man with a booming voice and a notorious penchant for name-dropping, spotted Evelyn standing quietly at the edge of the group. His gold cufflinks flashed as he pointed a commanding finger at her. "Hey you, coffee run girl," he barked, tossing a crumpled $20 bill at her feet. "Get me a latte, extra foam, and make it quick." You're not here to stand around looking lost." The room erupted in snickers. Employees nudged each other, phones already appearing to capture the moment of the trainee's public errand. Evelyn's eyes dropped momentarily to the bill, then lifted deliberately to meet his. She did not bend down. She did not touch the money. "I don't drink coffee," she replied, her voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the noise like a taut wire. The strategist's face turned scarlet, contorted in anger, but before he could launch a response, Evelyn simply turned and walked away, leaving the $20 bill lying discarded on the floor. A quiet, anonymous intern nearby quickly slipped the money into his own pocket, his eyes wide with recognition. Later that afternoon, this intern was observed in the CEO's office, handing over a meticulously detailed list of names, beginning prominently with the strategists. Back at the networking mixer, the atmosphere had become looser. The wine was flowing freely, and conversations had grown louder. Evelyn stood near the buffet, sipping a glass of water, the restructuring folder now safely tucked into her bag, her eyes observing the room. Then Blake sauntered over, his grin wider and meaner than before. "Well, look who's still here," he announced. Before Evelyn could move or react, he tilted the fresh glass of Coca-Cola he was holding, deliberately letting the soda splash across her blouse, her hair and her face. The room froze solid, and then the inevitable laughter followed, sharp and cruel, like the sound of shattering glass. "She looks like she just climbed out of the basement," someone muttered. A louder voice chimed in. "Guess she's showcasing her adaptability, huh?" Evelyn stood perfectly still, the liquid dripping cold and sticky from her chin. Her eyes felt dry, though they were tinged with red. She made no move to wipe her face or step away. She simply held Blake's gaze, steady, unblinking, and utterly unfazed. He laughed again, but this time it was forced, hollow, and he suddenly felt a pervasive, inexplicable chill. As the mixer began to wind down, a junior executive approached Evelyn, clipboard in hand, her lips pursed into a thin, disciplinary line. "You are absolutely not supposed to be here," she stated, her voice clipped, scolding Evelyn as if she were a misbehaving child. She pointed dramatically to Evelyn's badge, where the word trainee glared brightly under the lights. "This is an invite-only event. I don't know who let you in, but you need to leave now." The nearby crowd turned, eyes glinting with amused expectation. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record the inevitable humiliating dismissal. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the water glass, but her face remained perfectly calm. She set the glass down with slow, deliberate precision. "I'll go," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting effortlessly through the murmurs of the room. As she walked toward the exit, a man who had been silently observing the proceedings from a corner office picked up his phone and sent a short text to the board. "Thorne's here. They don't know." The junior executive smirked, unaware of the impending catastrophe, as Evelyn's shadow passed under the doorway. The cruel laughter was still echoing faintly when Eleanor, the senior advisor, appeared. Her face was set like granite. She didn't utter a word, but simply pointed to a security camera positioned prominently in the corner, its red light blinking recording. Evelyn's eyes followed the gesture, then flicked back to Blake. She didn't need to speak. The room was already beginning to shift, people whispering and glancing nervously at their phones. Minutes later, the executive board received the security footage. Evelyn, drenched in cola, standing tall and unmoving as the laughter roared around her. Someone in the crowd gasped. "Oh my God, that's Thorne." The head of HR, a balding man with a nervous eye tic, turned visibly pale. "We're screwed," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Evelyn, meanwhile, had picked up her bag, the soda still dripping from her hair, and walked out, her flats silent on the carpet. The next day in the cafeteria, Evelyn sat alone, her tray holding only a simple apple and a bottle of water. A group of data analysts, their laptops open and their egos even louder, noticed her and immediately began whispering. One woman, with a sleek updo and a voice that carried like a foghorn, stood up and marched over. "You're in my seat," the woman declared, planting her hands firmly on her hips, daring Evelyn to challenge her authority. "This is where the analytics team sits. Not whatever you are." She gestured dismissively at Evelyn's plain attire, and her colleagues snickered behind her. Evelyn's hand paused on her apple. Her eyes lifted to meet the woman's. She stood, picked up her entire tray and simply said, "It's yours now." Her voice was calm, but the way she held the woman's gaze made the analyst's confidence visibly waver, causing her to involuntarily step back. As Evelyn walked away, a quiet server who had witnessed the exchange slipped a quick note to the cafeteria manager, detailing the incident and the analyst's name. The following morning, Evelyn returned to Viridian's headquarters. Her blouse was clean but still plain, her slacks still a little loose. She approached the reception desk, her trainee badge clipped to her belt. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight manufactured smile and heavy makeup, barely looked up. "You're not on the list for today's CEO and chairwoman strategy meeting," the receptionist said, her tone cold and dismissive, as if addressing a delivery driver. A few employees nearby snickered. "Maybe she's trying to crash the meeting to save face after yesterday," one whispered, loud enough for Evelyn to hear. Evelyn didn't respond. She stood still, her hands folded, her eyes calm but relentlessly sharp. The receptionist eventually glanced up, confused by her silence, then immediately looked back down, typing furiously on her computer. During a later lunch break, Evelyn sat alone at a different table, her tray holding a simple sandwich and a water bottle. A group of creative directors, suits pressed, egos inflated, spotted her and approached. One woman, with a sharp jawline and a conspicuous diamond bracelet, leaned condescendingly over the table. "Sweetie, this table is for department heads," she said, her voice dripping syrupy pity. "You're in the wrong spot again." She flicked her wrist, an apparently accidental movement, knocking Evelyn's water bottle directly to the floor. The cap popped off, and water immediately began pooling under the table. The others laughed. One man recorded the spill on his phone, zooming in deliberately on Evelyn's now-soaked flats. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't reach for the bottle. Her eyes met the woman's, steady and completely unyielding. "I'll clean it up," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. She then slowly and deliberately knelt to retrieve the bottle. The creative director's smile froze on her face, her confidence visibly cracking as Evelyn stood and walked away, leaving the spilled water to be dealt with. As Evelyn walked toward her assigned desk, a facilities coordinator, clipboard in hand and a permanent scowl etched on his face, stopped her in the hallway. "You're not authorized to use this floor's printer," he stated, pointing at the stack of budget reports she was holding, reports she had been asked to review. "Interns use the basement machines. Don't make me report you." A few passers-by slowed down, smirking. "She's really pushing her luck," someone whispered. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the papers, but her face remained calm. She handed the stack of reports directly to the coordinator, her eyes never leaving his. "Check the signature on those," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. He flipped through the stack, his scowl quickly fading into shock as he realized the chairman's initials were clearly marked on every single page. He stammered, attempting an apology, but Evelyn was already walking away, leaving him clutching the reports as if they were burning his hands. At that very moment, the heavy mahogany meeting room doors opened, and the CEO stepped out. He was young, perhaps early 30s, impeccably dressed in a suit that looked prohibitively expensive. He spotted Evelyn instantly, his eyes locking onto hers. Without uttering a single word, he bowed low. It was a deep, deliberate gesture, the kind of profound respect rarely seen in a casual corporate environment. The entire room went dead silent. Blake, standing near the back, dropped his phone, the clatter echoing loudly. Sienna took a shaky step backward, her red dress suddenly looking too loud, too desperate. The CEO straightened, his voice ringing clear and steady for the entire office to hear. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce our new chairwoman of Viridian Global's North American division, Ms. Evelyn Thorne." He paused for effect. She will personally lead our entire corporate restructure. The air seemed to rush out of the room. Heads turned, mouths fell open, but no one could formulate a sound. As the newly formed board meeting began, Evelyn stood composedly at the head of the table, her confidential folder open. Her eyes scanned the room, absorbing the shock and the sudden frantic realization on the executives' faces. A senior board member, a grizzled man with decades of institutional memory, stood and respectfully cleared his throat. "Ms. Thorne," he said, his voice steady but respectful, "we have been anxiously awaiting your input. Your family's legacy precedes you." The mention of the Thorne name caused a final, profound shift in the room. Blake's face drained entirely of color, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Sienna's pen froze mid-note, her breath catching audibly. Evelyn offered no acknowledgement of their terror or the sudden deference. She simply nodded once and began outlining the comprehensive restructure. Her voice was calm, her authority absolute and undeniable. The senior board member sat down instantly, his deference serving as a powerful signal to the rest of the room. This was no temporary trainee. Evelyn didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't change her posture. She stood there, her hands still folded, her badge still reading trainee. But the way she carried herself, shoulders back, chin up, eyes steady, said everything. Blake's face was chalk white as he fumbled uselessly to retrieve his phone. Sienna's smirk had completely vanished, her eyes darting repeatedly to the floor. The receptionist at the front desk froze, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, realizing her fate. Evelyn didn't look at any of them. She merely walked toward the meeting room, her steps even, the CO holding the heavy door open for her. The fallout was immediate and devastating. By noon, Blake and Sienna were suspended, pending an investigation into documented workplace misconduct. The security footage, recorded from multiple angles, provided undeniable evidence. The head of HR sent out a company-wide email, filled with formal language and vague apologies, but it was meaningless. The reality was already spreading like wildfire. Evelyn didn't need to issue termination orders herself. The panic-stricken board was doing it for her. The few employees who had shown even a shred of kindness, a quiet IT guy who had offered her a paper towel after the first soda incident, a junior designer who had offered her a genuine smile in the hallway, the quiet intern who reported the strategist, the facilities manager who noted the abusive interns, found themselves called into her office later that week. They were not there for a lecture, but for a promotion. Evelyn said little, merely thanked them for their service, and handed them new, significantly improved contracts. That afternoon, a final, definitive email arrived in every executive's inbox, sent from the European parent company, signed by the global chairman, Mr. Hawthorne himself. It was brief, formal, and devastatingly clear. Ms. Evelyn Thorne has been appointed chairwoman, effective immediately. All personnel are required to cooperate fully with her restructuring initiatives. The creative director who had spilled Evelyn's water bottle sat frozen at her desk, her diamond bracelet suddenly feeling intolerably heavy. She checked her phone and saw that her latest social media post, a snarky comment about the trainee's fashion sense, had been screenshotted and forwarded directly to the board. By evening, her department head had called her in, the contract termination letter already printed and waiting. During a quiet moment in the break room, a maintenance worker, an older woman with calloused hands and a profoundly kind smile, approached Evelyn as she refilled her water bottle. "I saw what they did to you," the worker said, her voice soft but firm. "You're stronger than they know." Evelyn paused, her fingers tightening slightly around the bottle. Her eyes met the maintenance worker's. "Thank you," she whispered, a word that carried a genuine warmth that had been absent from her voice all week. The very next morning, the maintenance worker found a formal letter taped to her locker, a promotion to facility supervisor, personally signed by Evelyn Thorne. The news spread through the lower ranks, generating a quiet wave of profound respect for the woman who had walked through the fire of corporate cruelty without ever flinching. The story inevitably hit the financial press a few days later. New York Business ran the headline, "The woman drenched in cola is now worth millions." The revelation was everywhere, online on X, and whispered throughout the halls. Blake's name was publicly ruined. His pending internship offers vanishing overnight. Sienna's professional online profile went silent, replaced by a blank avatar. The employees who had laughed were now quiet, their eyes carefully avoiding Evelyn's whenever she passed them. She offered no gloating, no smirk, no visible reaction to their fear. She simply kept working, her plain desk buried under restructuring reports, her phone constantly buzzing with crucial calls from the European office. In a final board meeting, Evelyn sat at the head of the long table. Her simple blouse and slacks remained unchanged, yet her presence now completely filled the vast room. A junior executive, one of the very few who had remained silent and non-participatory during the mixers, stood and respectfully handed her a sealed envelope. "This came from the European office," he said, his voice steady but respectful. Inside was a handwritten note from Mr. Hawthorne, the global chairman, her father's old friend. "You've done us proud, Evelyn. Lead with the strength you've always had." The room watched in silent awe as Evelyn read the note, her expression unreadable but her hand steady. She folded it carefully, slipped it into her pocket, and resumed the meeting, her voice calm, her decisions final. That junior executive was later named her deputy. His loyalty and silent observation quietly rewarded. On her final day in Seattle, Evelyn stood on the rooftop of Viridian's headquarters. The wind was soft, gently tugging at her hair, which she had finally let down for the first time all week. It fell in loose, natural waves, catching the warm late afternoon light. The city stretched out below, a vast panorama of steel, glass, and constant noise. She didn't need to say anything to anyone, didn't need to issue a press release or justify her actions. The quiet truth had proven itself. She had walked through their cruelty, their laughter, and their dismissive judgment, and she emerged on the other side not louder, not angrier, but undeniably taller. Her husband arrived quietly, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the rooftop. He was tall and unassuming, possessing a calm that perfectly mirrored her own. He didn't need to speak. The way the executive staff instantly stilled when he entered the space spoke volumes. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes softening for the first time that day. She never needed rescuing, a fact she knew well, but his presence served as a potent, comforting reminder that she was never truly alone. The city hummed far below. Evelyn smiled faintly, her hands steady on the railing. She had been judged her entire life, mocked for being too restrained, too plain, too quiet. But she had mastered one crucial lesson early on. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand. And when you do, the world adjusts. It always does.